we're not all on the same page. Like there are definitely hands at play that control and own different parts of the industry in different ways. I think there needs to be this balance because agriculture doesn't like to put that out there like big ag, but I'm like, it's out there. It's just, we're not explaining it right, I guess, essentially.
The great challenges we've seen on a lot of the smaller family farms is there's a tremendous amount of sacrifice just to be involved in the industry because it's a passion, it's something in your heart, that emotional tie that I think the everyday consumer has no idea.
The convenience, we've gotten used to fast food. So there's all these things that I think we as a society have grown accustomed to. And I think for those things to take place, I will just never stand my ground and say like, we can't make changes to better it or to meet some of the consumer demands.
Welcome to the Tyler Dickerhoof podcast with your host, me, Tyler Dickerhoof. On today's show, I am joined by one half of Discover Ag podcast hosts, Natalie Kovarik. Unfortunately, Tara Vanderdusen could not be here, but that's all right. I'm excited to have Natalie. Natalie is, like I said, one half of the host of Discover Ag podcast, where they talk about agriculture in our world, whether it is here in the US, other countries, really kind of sharing about ag from a totally different perspective. They cover hot, current headlines, but also give a real feel for what ag is really like. I'm excited to have this conversation with you. I'm excited to really share with my community, my heart, cows, all of that stuff, but from a bigger perspective. And I'm fortunate, my producer, Alex, who has, provided a lot of commentary for us to go through today, his background of having no understanding, no, perspective of agriculture. So I'm excited to get into it. Thanks for being here, Natalie.
I am so honored. Thanks for having me.
So let's do this. You grew up on a farm, as I grew up on a farm, but give the audience the perspective that you had growing up on a farm and looking forward professionally. Did being involved in the farm, was that an initial like, hey, I want to be here, or like, man, I want to get off the farm?
It was somewhere in between, I actually think. And it's a little bit of a tale as old as time. I think a lot of ranch and farm kids probably feel that pull to experience what's, off of the farm and ranch, what it's like in a bigger city. And I suppose I had that to a sense. I really enjoyed my upbringing. So I grew up on a cattle ranch in Southwest Montana. So really beautiful, beautiful part of the state. I had a very good childhood as the youngest of 4 daughters. And I think my parents found that great balance between having us work on the operation and be involved in it, but not having it be our identity where we actually, turn to like hating the farm and ranch. So I enjoyed my childhood, but my parents felt really strongly that all 4 of their daughters get an education in something that wasn't agriculture. And that choice was kind of made for me. My parents were very persistent about that. And I didn't give too much fuss about it. It's not like I had some strong tie to the ranch like some farm and ranch kids do. So I was kind of like, that sounds great. I can pick a degree and do something else. So I did. I picked pharmacy and I ventured off, into the big cities of Montana, got my pharmacy degree and absolutely loved it. I graduated. I was living in a bigger city in Montana, practicing clinical pharmacy. And I was near our family ranch and spent a lot of time on it. But, that was the extent of it. And I thought that would be the extent of my life. I thought I would just, spend time with the family, spend time on the family ranch, but I never thought I would marry a rancher. I never thought I would live on a ranch. I never thought I'd raise my children on a ranch. And then God does what he does and he chuckles and he has our plan for us.
One of the things that my team and I have talked about is there's a couple of us that have an ag background. And this is something that I think you and Tara have really given light to over the last few years of you bringing your brand to life, but also Discover Ag, is how this wonder of agriculture. And I say this wonder of agriculture because growing up on a dairy farm where I used to hide under my bed so my parents thought I was, already at the barn so I didn't have to go out and milk. And in those things, like you said, that resentfulness, even though I loved it, I didn't want to. Like you guys have created this wonder for so many people that are amazed by agriculture. Where do you see as kind of the great opportunity to show people what they don't know?
Yeah, that's such a good point. I think our podcast I think they say success is what, like part hard work and part luck, right? And I think that's a little bit of what Tara and I did, because we were obviously grinding and we had this big vision and this passion for what we wanted to create with the podcast and just on our social channels as well, our social channels, excuse me. But with that came a really great timing, where, as you said, people had this sense of wonder and awe kind of about farms and ranches and food and Western culture. And you can point that back to a lot of different things. You could point it back to Yellowstone. You could put it back to, what we all experienced in 2020. Like, there were all these things along the way that kind of made people want to be drawn back to, this way that 2% of the industry area of the world lives, but not everyone else does. And so I think we just kind of tapped onto that. It's a natural instinct, I think, curiosity in humans. I've always loved storytelling. And so I think I just took the passion I have for what we do every single day, and I weaved that with kind of the creative side of me. And then, as you said, tapped into that curiosity that was already there and said, hey, you're interested in agriculture, or maybe you have a different perception of agriculture, come along on our journey and you can get a better understanding of it. Like, you can have that connection that you crave.
So, again, this is, for me, I don't want to say being ingrained in agriculture, but it's a part of me. And so it's sometimes, the questions people ask, it's hard to get perception. Are they condemning, or are they like just wondrous, right? That curiosity. It's hard to, and especially I think you talk to a lot of people that grew up on farms. It's like, are you making fun of me because it used to be that way? And now all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, what you do is so amazing. In the same light, as you've had conversations in the community, people that have gravitated to, watching you and Tara, what has been the biggest aha moment for people that you're like, man, this journey is worth it because they're recognizing XYZ?
Yeah, I think it depends on, the week, honestly. So our podcast, we cover, we're kind of like a news podcast. I mean, we are not news reporters by any means, but I think that's how you would like explain it and, lump our podcast under is kind of like this reporting. Tara and I don't just get on and just kind of like, talk to each other or talk about our daily lives or anything like that. It's not one of those podcasts. We get on and we talk about the top 3 trending topics in the ag and food space that week, or the Western kind of, Western culture space that week. So we're really pulling those snippets, those headlines, and then breaking them down from our kind of female millennial farming, ranching perspective. And I think depending on the week, depending on the different topics we cover, there is something in that week that was really moving to me or monumental to me. So just recently, for example, we covered on the podcast, California, in Marin County, right outside of San Francisco, there was this lawsuit that took place between some environmental groups and farmers and ranchers that were in that area. Long legacy of farming and ranching in the area, long legacy of, upholding the environment and their due diligence as farmers and ranchers. They lost the lawsuit, and now they have 15 months to get off, the farm and ranch. And, we honestly weren't going to cover that article because, as you kind of said in the beginning, we love to showcase agriculture in a kind of a non-agriculture way. So things that feel really heavy in farming and ranching, sometimes we're like, is that too agriculture for our greater community? We love to hit like that pop culture kind of edutainment, educating information. So we kind of debated like, gosh, should we even cover this? And they're like, oh, we need to. Like, when it came down to the end of the day, we're like, this is something we feel is really important to draw awareness to. And so we kind of did it. But man, oh man, the way people, and not agriculture, like we knew agriculture would get behind the movement of like, this is not right. What can we do? How can we reverse this? Can anything be done? We knew that would come from the people that are already, within our community. But seeing how the movement has spread to people that are just finding out about this, people that are just, seeing it as a social post, just discovering us, don't even know our mission or who we are at Discover Ag, and kind of, like I said, getting behind it to say, what can we do for these people here? That's really extremely rewarding. And like I said, you could give me a different week and a different topic, and there was probably something that I'm like, gosh, it was so rewarding to hear someone's perspective on that, or someone saying, thank you for covering that, or I didn't know that. I think it really breaks down to like that topic at hand that we're covering.
One thing that I recognize is agriculture has been very underrepresented. If we go back generations, it wasn't necessarily the case. And, so much of our world today, if you ask someone, like, where does food come from? Do you know anyone involved in ag? And they're like, no, right? And it's such a rarity that, to me, what you just said of exposing the reality as opposed to what people perceive is as much of a gold mine of the 1840s as it is like normal culture, because it's so far removed. Do you find that as you interact with people, or is that maybe a little much?
No, I think again, given the topic, sometimes it is hard growing up in agriculture. It's all you ever knew, especially growing up in like small towns.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a ton of other friends that farmed and ranch. Actually, I only had one other friend that farmed, but your community was familiar with it. Your state is familiar with it. And I have lived in other states. I've lived in California briefly, and I attended school in Washington. I actually talked about that before. But again, I always felt like I was in areas that agriculture still had a piece and tie to the community, especially here in Nebraska too. So I've never had that culture shock that I think a lot of people have, as you said, like that real, big far removal from agriculture. I get exposed to it online, and that's when I kind of realized, oh gosh, there's something to sharing agriculture online, is when I was like, oh, people don't know. But I think it just depends. I think there are certain things that people will still now say, believe, or feel that shock me, because I'm like, gosh, how could someone actually think that, in today, 2025. And then there are other things that I'm pleasantly surprised of. Wow, that, I didn't think that would be well received or understood. And they have a much better grasp on our industry than I went into it. So I think it's kind of meeting halfway sometimes. It's taking away our bias and our perception that people like don't know what's going on in agriculture, and kind of stepping up to the plate open-handed and ready to have just like a conversation. And then the same from them, like I do think there is due diligence on consumers. And that goes for me with other industries too, to understand what it takes for, me to turn on the light, for electricity, like all the things around us that we take for granted every single day, because we have as a society segmented smaller populations to take care of different things, for the betterment of society and all of that. I do think there's a little bit of due diligence for them to also do some research so that they can step up to the plate and have the same conversations too.
Very much, I would say Mike Rowe, who I know you're a big fan of, right? Mike Rowe did so much to expose dirty jobs, blue collar work over, his most recent career, right? Being a major proponent of FFA, involved in the trades. How much do you see that, quite honestly, you guys are the next generation of torchbearers that shine that light?
Oh, that is a heavy torch to hold.
Really? Why?
No, that's so kind. I think I really, for one, I really admire everything, as you had said, that Mike Rowe has done for blue collar work and agriculture and some of these underrepresented industries. He is such a mentor to me in the way of, as you said, kind of taking these things and not just educating people on them, but making them exciting and they want to devour into them and fun. And, as you said, we do aim to do that with our podcast, is to make agriculture like fun and hip and, cool again and all those things. But yeah, we're just a little podcast, I'm just a little ranch girl in Nebraska, so to think that there's, I guess I would like to think it's like on an industry whole that, we're all kind of out sharing our story and leading the way to kind of bridge that gap.
One of the things that, I have, other than, the handful of steers that I raise or dairy cows that I have throughout the country, my active everyday profession is not in agriculture. Yet agriculture is not far from me. And part of it, I try to keep it close. And one of the great experiences that I've had of working not in the industry is I feel like I do more to promote the industry than any point during my 13 years of doing nutrition for cows. Whether it's through our network marketing business, we're promoting, people to drink, protein shakes and whey shakes and, those consumable products that I felt like I was doing more to promote the dairy industry and ag in general. Or now that I get to talk to people in such a different light, like I'm not every day consulting with farmers. I'm talking to people like, through this podcast, leadership or whatever else. And it's so fulfilling, but yet it's almost like, man, there's a part of me that hurts because I feel like I wish I could do that within the industry. Do you relate to that? Do you understand that as you've gone back and forth of being involved the day-to-day, with your husband, Luke, as opposed to when you weren't involved day-to-day? Do you understand that?
Oh, yeah, totally. And I think actually a lot of people would relate to exactly what you said. I think there is ideas and perceptions, and this comes to like leadership and advocating in any industry, right? Not just agriculture. But I think there is like the traditional in your face kind of molded way we think of like being a leader and advocating for and talking about different things. And then there is all the other infinite ways you can show up to support. And as you said, sometimes some of those like supportive, the roles we think of or the actions we think of as being supportive, sometimes those have like the biggest conversion. Sometimes those are the most meaningful ones. And so, yeah, I think that's something that, you know, actually is really important for youth to hear too in the industry, is that there's a lot of ways to be involved in agriculture. There's a lot of ways to support the industry besides just every single day, you know, being a farmer and rancher in production agriculture. Like, you know, going back to what I just said, like it's a full takes all kinds, you know, all kinds of kinds to make a difference. And that can be being involved in agriculture in a different way, first production, or as you said, being outside and being an ally industry member. So no, I think it's really important what you said, and I think a lot of people actually relate to it.
I want to transition a little bit just because my wife and I have done it. You know, yourself and Luke balancing it now, where the demands of your role, right? The travel, the speaking, the engagement, the opportunities you get to go do, but yet you guys still have a ranch at home. You know, you have a couple boys at home. How have you guys, especially over the last 4 years, this has changed dramatically? Probably, is it fair to say it's exceeded what maybe you thought it would be at first, but you know, you can understand it? Like, how have you guys balanced that?
Yeah, I mean, that is all credit to my husband. I knew I married the perfect person for me in a lot of regards. You know, my husband and I got married later in life. And so I think by that point in time, I had known what I was looking for in a spouse. Like I had figured everything out that you figure out in your 20s, you know. And by my late 20s, I knew the things that were really important to me when it came to a spouse. And you know, I could rank faith and a couple of other things in there. But I never would have ranked, honestly, I guess, like what we're bundling as like a supportive when it comes to your job, right?
Yeah.
Because when we got married, I was actually just a pharmacist. So to think I needed support to go just to, a 9 to 5.
Just a pharmacist.
Well, it's just different.
I mean, you're just mixing drugs for people. I mean, yeah.
But you know, you're going to a 9 to 5, you come home, you leave your work at work. You know, I just didn't think that would be important in my spouse, that I would need that quality of someone who would allow me to chase my dreams, not make me feel guilty for it, not resent me for it, not be a barrier to it. And yet I did marry someone that did all that unknowingly. And it's such a gift to me because the more I have, again, kind of stepped out of that, I guess, structured, chemistry side of my life where I just go to work and be a pharmacist, and stepped into this creative entrepreneur, speaker, podcaster, social, sharer, all these other things that actually really fulfill me creatively and fill me in a, honestly, in like a kind of like chasing my passions kind of way, right? Like dreaming big kind of way. He's never stopped me before. And so I just really lucked out that anytime I had something I wanted to do, any crazy idea, he was always on board. And I just happened to be blessed in that manner.
That's not always the case.
No. And it's crazy because I do think that is one of the biggest contributors to my success is the support my husband has given me. I know that I wouldn't have been able to launch different things I've launched when it comes to our business, or take different trips that have been very instrumental in success and growth without his support. And so, it's crazy. I would say it's one of the biggest things that has lended me to my success is that support. And unfortunately, it's not something we always give our spouses every single, marriage out there.
I think, especially knowing this firsthand, experiencing growing up in it, it's not always the case in agriculture. It's usually, many times, whether it's a family, multiple generation, or the sacrifices so many spouses have to make. It's like, hey, we're only able to operate this farm because, like my family, we had a small little dairy farm. My dad had an off the farm job. My mom had an off the farm job in order to try to make it work. And, even in those cases, I know so many times where it feels like either one of the spouses feel like stunted because, man, I really wish I could go do what I want to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's something actually that people outside of the industry aren't very aware of when it comes to agriculture is how, I guess, for like lack of a better word, emotional our industry
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the core family, it can be really hard in relationships if you have, as you said, maybe one spouse who feels like they have to work off the ranch in order to provide for this quote unquote lifestyle, right? So they're just out there grinding, going to a 9 to 5. They don't even care about in order to make the bills float so that you can lose all your money doing, a passion that your other spouse cares about. I think children can feel it sometimes if they have to work on the farm and ranch all the time, or if they have a parent that can't, be at sporting events or be involved in their life because the farm and ranch calls for it. I think vacations are a big deal in agriculture. And that's just the core family. As you said, you could span out, and then you get into where siblings sometimes feel resentment because they had to go back and help on the farm and ranch because mom and dad needed it and none of the other siblings were. And so, there's all this emotions floating around in agriculture that makes it an interesting industry because most farms and ranches are $1 million like enterprises, right? If you look at the cash flow of what's going in and out at the end of the year, I mean, you are talking vast numbers that I think, again, those outside the industry wouldn't necessarily think, oh, that's like the capital that's needed every day, or like that's, the ins and outs of the business. And I'm not sure if you were to go like head to head with other multi-million dollar businesses, if they would allow or have to deal with all the emotions in the day-to-day of the business that farmers and ranchers have to do, right? I mean, it's just a very, very emotional toll, and not always positive ones, right? I mean, there are wonderful things to agriculture, but as we've just been saying, there's this very heavy kind of negative side to it too.
Yeah. I think that's one of the challenges that I've worked through in my career, and having to deal with that and seeing the difficulty of a family going through tragedy that ultimately led to my parents saying, we're done with this because of the emotional toll. But I think part of that emotional toll that people don't recognize is so many farms, and we hear in the headlines, there's the corporate farms and then there's, the small little family farms. Like, well, the small little family farms, I'm going to use Kovarik Ranch, right? Your husband has a job off the farm. Technically, you have a job off the farm. That's what's made it viable for you guys to get started. And most people don't realize that's what it takes just to try to operate this business to where it can be sustainable.
Yeah, it's really crazy. Insurance, I mean, there's all sorts of different things that require usually a family member to work off the ranch or farm in order to be a sustainable lifestyle for people who choose to be in agriculture now.
Yeah. And I think part of that challenge is when we hear, like the world we live in today, food prices are going up and up, and people are like, oh, I haven't heard it. Maybe you've heard it, this idea of blame the farmer. I think there's a sector they want to blame, the quote unquote factory or corporate, which you just mentioned. The enterprise is so large that it gets there because of the number of families involved, or in order to have the infrastructure to be competitive. But yet there isn't this push to say, oh, let's blame the farmer. Let's figure out where that is. How do you see yourself in a place to help educate people to say, hey, what we pay when we consume is not necessarily what farmers receive?
Yeah, it's really wild. I wish I had the cents on the dollar that goes back to the farmer because it's pretty astounding. I do think it's actually, one of the things we talk about on the podcast a lot is the MAHA movement, so the Make America Healthy Again movement, that's pretty popular right now. And there are things I love about that movement, and there are things I would criticize about that movement.
All right, what do you love? What do you love?
So this would be one thing. I do think that there are more and more people paying attention to the food industry, and they are starting to segment out food manufacturing. They understand that the wheat farmer isn't necessarily General Mills. The wheat farmer isn't necessarily the Wheaties box. There are these different players in the food industry. And I do think more and more people are starting to recognize like quote unquote big food than I think historically people have ever kind of like siloed that portion of the food industry out. And obviously, when you're in agriculture and you're the farmer and the rancher and you're the little guy, that's good news for us. That's good news for people to say like, the Pepsis of the world and the General Mills and, the Hershey's, like they are different than our farms and ranches. And so that is a different conversation of wanting to support the farms and ranches. How do we do that? And then maybe, some of these problems that were maybe lumped on the agriculture industry are now kind of being lumped on, the true root of the cause, which is oftentimes what happens after it leaves our farms and ranches.
producer Alex. He's really good at pulling up stats. 2022, the farm share was 14.9 cents of every dollar.
Yep.
That's it. In as well, 7.9% of that went directly to farm production.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So half of what went back that was, aside from the 85 cents, actually went to the farmer. So 8 cents of every dollar. That's it.
Yep.
That's it.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, margins, not good in agriculture.
Well, I mean, and again, coming from the industry and especially dairy, which is even a different beast compared to some of the others because of the daily absolute requirement. There's no fudging, right? And, I would talk to my friends and like the reality is you would break even, you would hope to break even 3 months of the year to cover up for the 9 months of the year that you're losing.
Yeah, that is that's a huge issue with people actually trying to get into agriculture too. So again, going back to Maha, we're having, nationwide, we're having some of these really great conversations about like what we can do to better the food system. And a lot of it's like, they want these changes. And to me, it's just my personal opinion, but a lot of it comes down to like, okay, we could go to that place and make that change you want in the food system. But a lot of it to me comes down to like, okay, we need more farmers and ranchers then, if these are some of the things people want to do, right? And I worry about that because I think that, as a first generation operation, Luke, had family, his grandparents had production agriculture. And I obviously shared at the beginning of this, I grew up in production agriculture, but neither of us are on a ranch that belonged, to parents or whatever. So we were technically first generation. And that was one of the biggest barriers to us, my husband starting the ranch was how do you cash flow something when you are required massive capital for X amount of the years, over half of it, right? 6, 7, 8, whatever months you want to get into. And you require on major lump sums, 1 or 2 days of the year or, 1 or 2 months of the year, depending on what you're in.
Explain that for people that are listening. I obviously get it, but explain it for somebody that maybe is listening and has no idea what you just said.
Yeah. So here's kind of one very specific example. So in the beef industry, there are ranches that raise cattle to go into food production. So they would be sold to, go to grocery stores, go to restaurants, etc. And there are also ranchers who raise cattle for the genetics. So the point of them raising cattle is not to enter the beef supply chain. It is for them to raise really good males or females that other ranches would want to buy to improve their herd genetics. They sell those cattle once a year. So that was kind of the family ranch I grew up on. We had a bull sale once a year. That is where a majority of our income for the entire year. I mean, it's a big day. It's a big, exciting day if the day goes good, right? But that means for the rest of the time, we farmed a little bit in the summer. You could sell hay. There's certain things you could do. But for the majority of the year, you are banking on that one day to bring in enough income to essentially float you the entire rest of the year. And again, comparing to other business models out there in other industries, I don't think that's super typical. And so it obviously accounts for a lot of problems. You have a major expenditure in the fall you didn't account for. You don't have another way to drive income that is built into, the system of your ranch or farm. You get into the emotions of it, the stress of it. So there's a lot of, I think, negative things about kind of way the industry is built up. And you could, relate that to farming, so they harvest, whatever month, September, October, whatever, they're selling their grain at that time of the year. It's those prices at that time of the year to float the rest of, the farm through the entire year. So it's kind of this unique model.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a lending component there where is obviously big part of it, and it's paying off that debt, and you're like, can I service this debt? But you mentioned it's just the normal everyday life without additional source of income, right? Without working at a pharmacy, without selling genetics. Otherwise, it is, man, how do we make sure that we account? And I think, well, as I experienced, one of the things to go first was the family part of it, the vacations, the, whatever you want to add into that, the sports, the extras. And I think that's one of the great challenges we've seen on a lot of the smaller family farms is, there's a tremendous amount of sacrifice just to be involved in the industry because it's a passion, it's something in your heart, that emotional tie that I think the everyday consumer has no idea.
Yeah, I saw a funny reel going around social media the other day that was like, it has to be family farms because only family would put up with like all the shit that goes on and come back, every single day to the farm and ranch. You know, it's why sometimes employment's a challenge.
Well, I mean, it's a challenge because of that, the nature of the cash flow, but it's also who wants to do it? And if you're not doing it for yourself, who wants to do it?
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting thing. When it's easy for my husband and I to go out and grind every day or, do all the things we have to do because at the end of it, we know, we're doing this hopefully to pass this on to like the next generation. But, when you're asking your employee to show up and grind every single, especially like, okay, so dairy, milking, you don't stop twice a day, every single day, 365 days a year. I mean, someone has to show up and milk the cows. So when you're asking someone else to do that, who necessarily doesn't get to pass on, the land, those animals, that doesn't belong to them, you're asking something completely different than like the owner operator to do.
Going back to the Make America Healthy Again. What's one of the, you talk a little bit about that perspective, the, kind of trying to point towards the idea of big food, the difference between the producer and, who's really, providing the product to the consumer. And it's a vast difference. I have actually a metaphor describing it where I tell people it's like this, like, hey, if you were to go buy a car from Ford today, right? And you were to go to Ford and Ford's like, hey, we don't make the car. The car just shows up here and this is what we have. And we're like, well, what are you talking about? You're Ford. You manufacturer. I'm like, no, we send to a steel company in Korea. It's like, hey, this is the steel we want. You send it to us. We have no control over it. And that's kind of the perception that I felt big food has had is like, whoa. It's not on us. It's the farmer. It's like, no, but you tell the farmer exactly what you want. You pay them what you want. The farmer has very little control, but then you want to tell the consumer is like, no, it's not us. It's the farmer. It's like, it's not the reality. You guys control all of it.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's one of the, so speaking again from the beef industry, I'll stick in that kind of sector of agriculture. You kind of alluded to earlier, like these big, factory farms or corporate agriculture. And when it comes to the beef industry, I always have a little bit of qualm with that, because I'm like, the beef industry is truly made up of, families, ranchers. It's actually very segmented. Which I don't think a lot of people understand compared to other protein like, pig or pork, chicken or pork.
Yeah.
Those like, a Tyson is very involved. It's just a different structure than beef, right? So, and the beef, it's like a family ranch, sells it, owns it, the animal sells it, which is then sold to, usually if you're sticking in conventional agriculture, it's like a feedlot, right? And then the feedlot even sells it to the packer, right? So there's all this exchange of hands. And the beginning of it, where the animal spends the majority of his life, is a family farm and ranch, right? But on the same hand, I'm like, if you want to go after, Cargill and JBS and all of the packing industry, I am fine with that because that is corporate agriculture. That is big ag, So I think there's a balance because there's a lot of farm and ranches that are like, oh, no, big ag doesn't exist. And I'm like, no, big ag does. It's just not, what maybe we're not all on the same page. Like there are definitely hands at play that control and own, different parts of the industry in different ways. And so I think there needs to be this balance because agriculture doesn't like to put that out there like big ag, but I'm like, it's out there. It's just, we're not, explaining it right, I guess, essentially.
You mentioned there's some things, MAHA that you don't like. What's that?
I just think that I'm a little bit of a realist in life. And I think that some of the things they want to go after, I'm like, feels maybe a little utopian to me where I'm, I think subsidies is an interesting conversation. Huh? I think we could lump it under the umbrella of like chemicals. So pesticides, herbicides, all of that is an interesting conversation. You'll hear Tara and I say this a lot on our podcast. We are not extremists. So we don't ever, unfortunately, if we did, we'd probably have way more social clips go viral because we'd have this, extreme stance that would really be polarizing online. But I'm just not. I'm never extremist. So you will not fall, even though I'm in agriculture, you won't hear me say like, we need pesticides. We cannot change. We can't get rid of glyphosate. We can't make these changes to the agriculture industry. that can't be done, which is some people's viewpoint. And then I'm not on the other side either. That's like, we need to get rid of every single pesticide and herbicide. Like, we cannot be having chemicals used in food production. I fall a little bit, to me, what I call, like, as I said, that realist portion where I'm like, okay, I think there are, again, with the way food is structured and the way we as a society have, and not just getting into like mouths to feed, because I'm a little tired of that rhetoric of like, we have, 9 billion mouths to feed. So
that
we have
is
to
one
produce.
of my biggest probably gripes with agriculture. Just shut up. No one cares. Yeah. We don't care about how big of a water bucket you feel like you need to carry every day. Like, just get the job done. Move on. Like, I don't know. I don't like it either.
So it's not about that, but I do think it's about, the convenience. We've gotten used to fast food. We have gotten used to DoorDash. We've gotten used to, having food always available at the grocery store. We've gotten used to shopping out of season, right? So there's all these things that I think we as a society have grown accustomed to. And I think for those things to take place, I think if, me being in Nebraska outside of a town of 2,000 expects strawberries to be in my grocery store all year long for me to source, then I think there are some realities to the food system that probably involve a little bit of quote unquote conventional agriculture. So we want people to, farmers in California to be able to grow the amount of strawberries at the quantity, at the quality we want. It's probably going to involve some sort of, chemical, some sort of, again, something that would fall under the conventional side of agriculture. But again, I think going too far down on the other side of the spectrum, like, I will just never stand my ground and say, like, we can't make changes to better it or to meet some of the consumer demands. Like, if there is a demand for, against, I guess, sticking with like pesticides, like, okay, well, what could we look at? Is there a difference in glyphosate? Could we change a consumer habit then to not use it? Like, what are the trade-offs? Like, what are the changes we could make?
That's a great long conversation. And I think it comes back to, it's like anything. It's like, well, this is the way we've always done it. Well, just because that's the way you've always done it doesn't mean that's the way it needs to be done.
Yeah.
But oftentimes the risk of doing it differently with such fine margins it takes a lot of safety, security to be able to, innovate. And like, hey, we may have gone wrong. Where it's like, you go wrong and, you do something, change your vaccination protocol on the farm, right? And all of a sudden you have, you lose a portion of calves. Now all of a sudden you either don't have as many baby mamas or you don't have as many bulls to sell. That's a major knock in your whole ecosystem. It's like, do we dare risk it? That's a reality that I get. I think it's hilarious that everyone wants to be against seed oils. I don't care. I get it. I understand.
I just put on X is like my new favorite platform, and I just put out a quote the other day, or a tweet or post. I don't know, whatever you call it.
Whatever.
Yeah, that was like, could everyone just stop? Just shut up about seed oils for a moment. Like, I don't care what side you fall on, but like, could you stop talking about it? Like, my head hurts. People need to stop arguing over seed oils.
Well, what I think is comical, I was telling my 18-year-old daughter this, who, doesn't necessarily know much about agriculture other than, she sees a few cows, she's, led a few heifers at times, that's it. And we're talking about it, and I said, I think it's hilarious that people are like, no seed oils, no canola oil, no soybean oil, none of that. And yet they're also the same people that aren't necessarily pro-beef, pro-meat. And it's like, well, wait a second. Well, the restaurants, the fast food restaurants, they just switched to tallow to fry their potatoes in. Where do you think that comes from? And it's kind of like, I don't want the seed oil, go use tallow. Where do you think we get tallow? Because you get tallow from cows. And so you can't be in both. And at the same point, I also understand this, especially in the dairy industry. One of the major feed components for cows is what's left over from making seed oils. So you're kind of like, the whole chain is interlocked. Again, if you don't want to use canola oil, soybean oil, I don't care. I prefer olive oil, whatever. But it's like, I also understand how the entire chain works. Anyways, I think it's kind of funny.
No, I think that's something we talk about on the podcast too, is like, okay, again, we can make some of these changes and like, they sound great. Like, sure, maybe let's go to a tallow-based system. That sounds great. But there are these ripple effects that then occur that, even sometimes within the industry, we aren't even aware of like exactly what will happen. Like, oh, what would happen, if we don't, because it is, as you said, very circular. I think sometimes we get the finger pointed at us in agriculture, but we're pretty good at, reusing different byproducts and different things where it is we're working on it. There's always improvement to be more circular, but I do think agriculture does a good job of being a circular industry. And so then it's like, okay, well, what does that actually mean if we took away that substance? Like, what would that do, to the rest of what's the domino effect to that? And as you said, that can be a scary thing for policy and leaders to want to change, and that's why sometimes you don't see policy and leaders making these big changes, because it's like, well, there's a lot of little dominoes that we aren't entirely sure. And at the end of the day, like for me, food security as a nation is always number one. So right now, we're fortunate enough in the US to be a nation that produces our own food. We're not dependent on another nation to feed us. And you might not understand how not using seed oils or not, producing corn, the amount we do, or wheat, or like whatever you want to go after, or the change you want to make, might not necessarily understand how that could affect importation, exportation, different relations of the countries, all these different things that sometimes leaders in policy do, where you're like, oh, okay, so it's a little bit more complicated than just saying you're a farmer, don't plant corn.
I have two trains of thought. I'm going to try to tackle both of them in our time. The first one is, what do you think is the next big boulder that you have the opportunity to push to help educate, to help motivate people around?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't honestly know if I have a good answer to it, because I do feel very positive about like where we are right now in society with like connection to agriculture and food. Again, I feel like 2020 was like a really big time for people to pause and be like, oh, I actually want to know more about my food. But now in 2025, again, like for, lack of a better word, the MAHA movement has really pushed people to like reconnect. And I think it pushed even a bigger wave coming out of 2020. Like, I just feel like there is so much attention and focus on farming, ranching, food, and Western culture that like historically we probably haven't ever had. So for me, it feels like more of an exciting time than a time where I'm like, oh gosh, like we really got to tackle this, or like this is our next big problem. I just feel like it feels very hopeful and exciting to me.
I don't want to say this. This is kind of like inappropriate, but I wonder what Tara's take on that. One, because Tara is involved very much in that side of it. She got to speak, at a UN council, right, in Europe last summer, right? And so thinking about like even talking about regulations and those ideas and the MAHA movement, it's like, all right, is that really one of the bigger pieces? Is it understanding some of these regulations is it creating food security, or is it actually driving us towards insecurity of food?
Yeah. I mean, we're getting a lot of people talking about, this is something we talk about on the podcast, like a downfall of MAHA, and social media actually is like a quote unquote food influencer. So just people that are, talking about food that
you
maybe
don't
necessarily
need to name names.
I
get
won't.
The names.
But you can picture someone, standing in a grocery store telling you what you should and should not buy. And I just think that they're driving
there's
a lot
love-hate relationship, because
Yeah.
there's a part of it I get, and part of it is like, no, you're so far off base. But please go.
No, I don't know if I have a love relationship with many of them. I think that they breed a lot of misinformation. I think they breed a lot of, as you said, maybe they're creating more problems. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. There are all people that will do anything to have a viral video, and there's nothing more controversial right now, at least in 2025, than food, and like what's in food, what shouldn't be in food. And some of them I just it is interesting. And a lot of the times it's easy for me to like initially give my perspective thinking like United States. And as you mentioned, like Tara actually has experience going over like into world conversations of what like agriculture and food looks like. And that is very, very, very different. I cannot stress how different that is than what we are talking about in the United States. Access to land, women's roles with land, the importance of animal, there's a lot of, I think we forget some of the rights we have as a society in 2025 living in the United States where other countries don't have. And I think we forget, we don't spend as much money on our expendable income as other nations, which I think is crazy. Like we're one of the lowest nations, So I think that food conversations here in the United States are just very different than if you go to South America and have the conversation, if you go to Mexico and have the conversation, if you go to, even Italy and have the conversation of like, especially Africa, like you go to all these different countries and continents and food conversations there. I think in the US, sometimes we're worried about very different things than a lot of other places in the world are worried about.
I almost take that as we're so worried about the micro, whereas a lot of other countries, it's a macro. Like it's the effect on their economy, it's the effect on their lifestyle, and it's also an effect on life or death, as you mentioned, some countries in Africa.
I heard a quote the other day that someone said, like, if you're fed and clothed, you have more problems than the person that isn't, because the people that aren't, their only problem is just figuring out how to get fed. And then when you're fed, like, it's like you can have an exponential list of other problems that you want to tackle and focus on. And sometimes I think that's like food conversations in America is like seed oils versus beef tallow versus olive oil versus avocado oil, like, I don't know if everyone is having that conversation, and we're pretty lucky to have that be it.
Yeah. Oh, I get French fries. Great.
Yeah.
I don't care what they're fried.
Yeah.
You mentioned there just a few moments ago, and it was the second thought that I wanted to tackle here is, you mentioned it on the global scale, but I want to know it, just your perspective, being a female in agriculture.
We are in a male-dominated industry, 100%. And that is changing. You could look at statistics, but more women are being involved, which is really great for agriculture. And I think the way that women are being involved is even changing and developing. And you're seeing more, females being the leads of farms and ranches and being the owners, et cetera. With that said, we're still in a male-dominated industry, and there are definitely females who have experienced bias, negativity, prejudice, all the things that come with that. I never have. I grew up with a father that was, he had 4 daughters, so I guess he couldn't really favor a son. But he never made us feel like we couldn't do anything on the farm and the ranch because of, being a female versus being a male. And the same thing, like the next, major exposure to agriculture for me is my husband. And he has never, again, made me feel like I couldn't do something on the ranch, or I shouldn't do something on the ranch, being the female role of it. He's always made me, again, he started this, operation before we got married, and he's always made me feel like it's part of, I signed the big loan. So it is part of, part of my, I part own it now too. But I've just never, I guess, experienced that stigma. And I have been involved in like other areas of agriculture. I've done some leadership and been involved in some programs too. And it's always been very women inclusive. But again, I can say that, and I could know that you could ask another female in agriculture and she would have a very, very different response to some of the hardships and barriers she's had to tackle.
I think that's one of the things that I see and understand. And, growing up at a farm where my mom was involved and my older sister was involved, there was no difference. Like that was foreign to me. Going to college and, much of the dairy program was pretty mixed. This is what I'm amazed now. So I grew up very involved, 4-H, FFA, national or, breed organizations. And I get those publications now. And this is the surprising thing to me. I just saw one of them yesterday. So I did dairy judging, did in 4-H, FFA, college. And there was, I think, Virginia Tech, one of my friends, she's a professor there. And all 4 competitors are female. Mm-hmm. And it is overwhelmingly, that's what I see. And it's interesting to me. It's like, great, awesome, they're doing but this is where I wonder. It's like, where are the men? Where are the boys? Yeah. What are they doing? That's what I wonder. And I think it's not like the team that I competed against in college, there was 2 of us male, 2 female, like whatever. It's not making that distinction, but I'm looking at it and I'm saying, why aren't they as involved? And again, not that it needs to be 50-50, just that's my sociological wonder.
Yeah.
And I think you have a son who is, a freshman in college and thinking about the world he's in, and like, what's that perception look like?
It's interesting to see, and there's obviously a lot of conversations in general society about, women's advancements and women's rights. And I'm obviously a huge supporter of that. But as you said, I'm like the mother of 3 sons too. So I'm always like, well, we can't forget about our boys either. It's cool though. I mean, it's also crazy actually, sharing about social media online. I feel like it's a lot of women influencers too versus men. So, I don't know.
Yeah. And again, I don't have an answer. I recognize it. I'm like, what are they doing? Are they playing video games instead? Are they like different sport? Like, what are they doing?
Women are just better at showing, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have a problem with it. Again, it's whatever. I mean, I have a daughter, I have sons. I'm like, and I say that because I look at it much what you perspective is I didn't necessarily recognize it myself, either something that I saw my mom deal with or my sister. It was like, it didn't really matter, like whatever. And like when my daughter was born as the oldest, I'm like, it didn't really matter. Like, I'm not going to treat different, but I know it is something that exists. And especially it has been a part of agriculture. And you think of like, oh, there's a female veterinarian, there's a female representative, there's a female, whatever. That at times was different. And now I think you look around, it's like, oh, it's beyond normal. Almost like I said, I recognize, there's less men involved than there were.
Yeah, it's actually a huge mission for Tara because she, unlike me, is the mother of all girls, right? And so she'll talk about a lot about growing up. So like you, she grew up on a dairy farm. And she'll talk about how her dad never made her, kind of the same as my dad, never made her feel different because, she did have brothers. So being, one of the girl in the family versus one of the boys in the family. But she'll talk a lot about how looking out, though, she just didn't see women out in the field around her, managing the barn wasn't a female, her veterinarian wasn't a female. And so she'll talk a lot about how like, despite, the support from her dad or her brothers, she just didn't visually see where she would fall in agriculture. And she just didn't see like women being, again, visually represented in agriculture like it is now. And so that's like very important for her and a big mission to her is just the ways, again, we're seeing women show up differently and even just in numbers show up in ways we haven't before.
As we finish up, as we kind of wrap up and I think about this is if this were all to go away today,
agriculture or social media?
No, social media. Not agriculture. Agriculture's not going away, right? That you can try to chase it away, but it's not going away. But your platform, if it changes and it goes away.
No, I was just saying, I've been thinking a lot about this because of TikTok, I was like, oh gosh, if, I would never took to TikTok. You could find me on there, but I don't even know how. 4 videos maybe is something I posted. Like I just never got into TikTok, right? And so it wasn't my main platform. And I was like, well, you people stop complaining about TikTok going away. We'd all be better without it, right? Like, my son would focus on college without it. We wouldn't have, kids glued to their phones with it. And honestly, adults don't need it either. Like, it's fine. There's other social media platforms. We're fine. But then I was like, well, that's easy for me to say because I'm not on TikTok. How would I feel if they pulled the podcast? And they were like, okay, well, tomorrow you don't get to show up and do Discover Ag, which is, my baby. That's what I love to do on social media and the way I love to share agriculture. And I was like, maybe I'd have, obviously different feelings about it. But then again, I was like, gosh, I don't know. I wonder if I would just wake up and just go to the ranch, I think it's interesting because I think some people that show up to social media as their jobs is a little bit different because social media is my job, but ranching is my job. That will always be the foundation of what our life and lifestyle is. And so I don't know if all of this was to go away. I don't know if it would devastate me or if I would just wake up and carry on with my life and, the country with the boys. I don't know.
Yeah, obviously you bring up the point about TikTok and it being a reality. I think about what I do and the reason why I do what I do. It's to share the lessons, what I had to grow through that, quite honestly, the ways that I dealt with difficult times, the death of my brother, in realizing, what I do is to really kind of give reason to that what I had to grow through is to give a reason. And I ask that because I think about it the same. I don't think you would do any different. You would just find a different way to do it. Because you found a way to serve people that is natural to your heart, that it, is fulfilling. And so again, part of asking that question is just wondering how much you've appreciated that to say, no, this is really awesome that I get to be one of those voices.
Yeah. No, it's funny when we started our podcast, we were kind of like, well, we'll just see if we like it. And maybe we'll do seasons, and take months off. And this holiday, actually, this last Christmas and Thanksgiving was the first time we've ever not recorded a podcast since starting. Like that's how quickly we fell in love with it. And I've actually had the conversation with Tara before. I was like, gosh, I just feel like, originally, you said it best when you said you find the way to share what you want to share if it's important to you. And so when I started sharing on social media, I loved it, but it morphed into needing the long form podcasting for me to love it still. And if we didn't have podcasting, I don't know if I actually would be on social media anymore. That side of it doesn't fulfill me as much as like these long conversations and these deeper, more meaningful, to me, it feels like, conversations. So no, I'm very grateful, honing in for me specifically on the podcast space, because I think a lot about how it's provided me the ability to, what I first loved about Instagram and other social media, is that sharing, that connecting, that information, that entertainment part. It's able to morph into something so much more bigger and something that means more to me. And so, I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you so much for your time. Where can people learn more about you, the podcast, all the stuff that you and Tara are involved in?
Yep. So if you're listening to this, you are probably a podcast person. So hop on over to your favorite podcasting platform and search for Discover Ag. We are in denim. I'm holding a chicken. Tara's holding a hot dog. That's how you know you found the right podcast. That is the podcast for you. But no, we'd love it if you come over there. We have a lot of fun. We're a Thursday episode podcast. And like I kind of said a couple times throughout this, we love to blend information and entertainment together. So we're not boring. We're a lot of fun, but we think you'll get some value out of it too. And then just my name is all the other social platforms. So Instagram, Twitter, X, and LinkedIn, Natalie Kovarik.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for everyone watching on YouTube. Make sure to hit the subscribe button as well as the bell, so that way you get notified whenever we drop new content, either Newswire on Monday, episodes dropping on Thursday as well. Until next time, thank you for being here. But one last thing, if you could, wherever you're listening to, the platforms, as Natalie mentioned, if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, those are the preferred ones that I prefer. If you could please rate and review this episode, so that way people can find more impactful leaders like Natalie, I would appreciate it. Until next time, choose to lead with impact.